Hey guys, in this video I want to show you this incredibly powerful One Bar Magicka Sorcerer build I've been using to solve veteran dungeons. You can also use it to solve world bosses, Harrowstorms, dragons, etc. And this build absolutely obliterates them, because it was made for solving dungeons, which are far more difficult than any overland content. If you want to see this build in action, you can look at this video where I solo Castle Torn in veteran difficulty. The build is also on my website, so if you prefer written guides over YouTube videos, you can read it there instead. The link will be in the description. In this guide, I'll be regularly using the terms regular and difficult. Regular refers to content that is intended to be soloed, such as Maelstrom Arena or Vateshran Arena, and to any overland content, such as world bosses, Dolmens, dragons, Volcanic Vents, Harrowstorms, Mirrormoor Incursions, etc. Difficult refers to solving 4-man content, such as dungeons. But even then, some of the easier dungeons would fall under the regular category. The line between regular and difficult isn't very rigid though. If you're struggling with a world boss, you can just use the difficult skill setup, which will have better survivability at the cost of having less damage. So let's start with skill setups. This is the regular skill setup. Crystal Fragments is a spammable that will proc the exploitation passive, increasing your critical chance by 6%. It will also heal you for 10% of your max health, thanks to the Blood Magic passive. Having it slotted will also trigger the Expert Mage passive, increasing your weapon and spell damage by 2%. Haunting Curse is simply an ability that deals a lot of damage per cast. Hurricane is your Sorcerer Mage Resolve, which is a crucial defensive buff, and it also deals decent damage. Barb Trap is a dot that will also apply Hemorrhaging stats effect at the start, and grant you Minor Force buff, increasing your critical damage by 10%. It will also trigger the Slayer passive, which increases your weapon and spell damage by 3%. Willed Soul, with the Physical, Lingering Torment and Breach combination on it, is a dot that will also apply the Major Breach debuff, which reduces enemies' armor by almost 6000, and is crucial for any non-overland content. Since it's a stamina ability that has to be recast every 10 seconds, it's going to improve our Magicka sustain by a lot. Use Razor Caltrops instead, if you don't have access to scribing. Summon Charge Atronach is the most powerful ultimate Sorcerer has access to. It will also keep proccing Concussion stats effect, which will keep up the Minor Vulnerability debuff, which increases enemies' damage taken by 5%. Bound Aegis is an ability that you can keep slotted on your back bar to gain its passive benefits. It will grant you Minor Resolve, Minor Protection, and increase your max Magicka by 8%. Now as for situational skills, depending on how much you dislike bar swapping, you can use Simmering Frenzy, which goes on your back bar, and only has to be activated once at the start of the fight. For overland content, where you don't need the Major Breach from Willed Soul, you can replace it with Arterial Burst and use it as your spammable. In that case, use Crystal Fragments only when you get the proc. And the last situational skill is Blood Craze. Use it instead of Willed Soul in overland content, if you can't use Arterial Burst because you're not a vampire. Now moving on to the difficult skill setup. I'm only going to mention abilities that change compared to regular setup. Revealing Flare will passively grant you Major Protection, reducing your damage taken by 10%. It will also trigger the Magicka 8 passive, which increases Magicka recovery by 10%. Ulfsil's Contingency, with the Shock, Gladiator's Tenacity, and Force combination on it, is a delayed AoE damage that also grants you 8% damage reduction for 8 seconds, and Minor Force for 22 seconds, which increases your critical damage by 10%. You should recast it every 8 seconds when under pressure, and every 22 seconds otherwise. Having it slotted on the front bar will also trigger the Magicka Controller passive, which will slightly improve your damage and sustain. Use Barb Trap instead, if you don't have access to scribing. Moving on to gear. This is the beginner setup, made with only crafted sets, so you can easily buy them off of guild stores, or ask someone to craft them for you, or craft them yourself, if you have researched enough. The two 5-piece sets we'll want to use are Order's Wrath and Claw of the Forest Wraith. Order's Wrath is just insanely powerful, and will stay relevant even as you move away from beginner setups. Forest Wraith not so much, but is the next best option. On weapons, you'll want to use 2 pieces of the Assassin's Guile set, just to trigger the 2-piece critical chance bonus. It doesn't have to be Assassin's Guile, it could be any set with 2-piece crit chance bonus, but I'm showing Assassin's Guile here because it needs the lowest amount of research traits to craft. On the image you can see that the traits are Training/Divines. Divines will straight up make you stronger, but if you're a new player, I think it's worth to sacrifice a tiny bit of power to get more experience gain, so you can level up faster. You should use daggers instead of maces, if you plan on doing mostly overland content, rather than instanced. For a ranged build, replace maces or daggers with a bow of the same set with sharpened trait for instance content, or precise for overland content, and with an absorb stamina enchant. This is the regular gear setup. Order's Wrath is an extremely powerful set despite being crafted, so it's a good replacement for Unsoul's Torment if you don't have access to it. For more difficult encounters, you can use heavy Beacon of Oblivion piece on your chest and use Unsoul's Torment on another body piece, like shoulders, legs, or boots. Moving on to champion points. In the blue tree, you'll want to use Master at Arms, Deadly Aim, Fighting Finesse, and Wrathful Strikes. When soloing extremely difficult dungeons, you should replace Wrathful Strikes and Fighting Finesse with 2 of the 4 mitigation slotables that match the fight's damage type, so Ironclad, Duelist Rebuff, Unassailable, and Enduring Resolve. Huge majority of the times is going to be Ironclad and Duelist's Rebuff. In the red tree, you'll want to use Bundles of Vitality, Sustained by Suffering, Rejuvenation, and Fortified. In fights with lots of adds, Siphoning spells and Bloody Renewal can be stronger than Rejuvenation and Sustained by Suffering. Moving on to race. When it comes to solo PvE, you need both damage and survivability, so pretty much all races have useful ratios. The best race for dealing damage is Khajiit. While the critical damage from Feline Ambush can sometimes be wasted, due to critical damage being capped at 125%, it will never happen in solo content, because there will be no tanks or healers, providing you with the major force buff. The best race for survivability, and what I am using, is Nord. The Ragged racial will provide around 6% damage mitigation. Moving on to Mundus. You should use the Shadow Mundus, which increases your critical damage. For extremely difficult dungeons, you should consider switching to the Lady Mundus, which increases your armor. Now attributes. For most content, you should put all 64 points into Magicka. For difficult content, you should devote as many attribute points as necessary to health. For some content you'll be able to get away with 32 health, 32 Magicka. For the extremely difficult stuff, you'll need 64 health. Moving on to food. Most of the time, you'll have to use the Orzorga's Red Frofgar in order to sustain. As for other alternatives, if your sustain is good enough, you can use Clockwork Citrus Fillet instead, which compared to Orzorga's Red Frofgar will lower your Magicka recovery and max health, but it will grant you additional max Magicka, which will increase your damage. There's also Orzorga's Smoked Bear Haunch. If a certain fight requires much more blocking or dodge rolling, you can use this food instead, which compared to Orzorga's Red Frofgar will lower your Magicka recovery and max health, but it will grant you additional stamina recovery. Moving on to potions. Use the Spell Power potions. They will greatly improve your sustain and provide major sorcery and major prophecy, which are crucial. You can craft them by combining Lady Smoke, Namira's Rot, and Cornflower. And that's it for this video. If you have any more questions, you can comment down below or join our Discord server Wildheart. As always, feedback will be appreciated. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe to my channel and check out my Twitch. Thanks for watching and see you next time.